Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and we'll start a whole new series here based on your suggestions. Be on the lookout for more of these videos throughout the week, and then I'll probably wrap things up by next week or so. I was looking at the suggestions this go around, and a lot of very interesting, a lot of good ones that I can't wait to talk about. So it'll be very nice to start some of the other videos too. This one I have not heard of before, mainly because it has to do with a particular location across the world, far away from where I am. So no doubt, at least in my area, most people haven't heard it, but if you go to United Kingdom, then there seems to be like a pretty popular urban legend there. And it's quite fascinating because it has to do with the urban legend of something potentially, very highly likely, existing at a time when today in this world we just pretty much see this notion or this thing in movies or in television shows, pretty much in fantasy land. But the idea that something like this could have existed in terms of a witch, and not only that, but the remains of a witch also being found, and you can actually go up there on a tour and see those remains to this day. It remains very fascinating. It instantly reminded me of one of my earlier videos when I talked about the Wow dragon. The idea that you have a dragon who, if but for the fact, is underneath mounds and mounds of earth. Apparently there's a location of the Wow dragon, of a real life dragon, the bones, the remaining of them, of the bones, in there underneath a mound of earth. And it's fascinating to think that if you could just dig it up, that you could find those remains. Same concept here. Apparently there's a witch somewhere on earth that was crucified or calcified or whatever, set in stone, and those remains have lived or stayed in a particular cave. And what I'm talking about is the urban legend known as the Witch of Wookey Hole. So very fascinating stuff. I'll give all the information here in a minute as far as its history, its location, how the witch came to be. Very fascinating stuff. It almost read like a movie. So it's very cool stuff. Now, as far as the location, again, it's in the United Kingdom, particularly in a place called Somerset, United Kingdom. So if you're ever there in the United Kingdom, and let's say you just happen to be near Somerset, take a little sideways tour and then go to see these caves. The caves themselves are very beautiful. They remind me of some caves that are near here in Austin in San Marcos. I believe they're called Natural Bridge Caverns. They're one of those things where it's a work of art created by nature over who knows how many millions of years. Just a beautiful buildup and formation of all these calcium deposits formed and merged and dissolved by just water. And when that happens, it creates this work of art that to this day is just astounding. So I have an idea of how these caves will look like just because I've been to Natural Bridge Cavern and I've seen some of the similar things myself. So those caves, again, take a chance whenever you're in Somerset, and you won't be disappointed with regards to that. But let's talk about, at least in this video, about the legend of the witch herself. Stories of this witch and how she came to be, they go back hundreds of years. In fact, the very first known instance of, let's say, a recording of the witch or a mention of the witch, at least in paper, has to go back, you have to go to like 1470. There was a guy by the name of William of Worcester, and he was one of the earliest ones, if not the earliest, who wrote about a very specific formation within the cave, which you'll see a picture of here. This apparently, at least according to the urban legend, is the exact spot where the witch was either calcified or turned to stone, or and somehow like she was cursed or changed from being a living witch into the remnants that you see today. I'll talk about that here in a minute, but that is the actual place, like the actual location, at least based on the urban legend of what happened. So back in 1470, that's the earliest known mention of this from this guy William of Worcester. He says he described it as, quote unquote, the figure of a woman clad and holding in her girdle a spinning distaff. So that's the earliest known mention. And then as far as someone actually stating that it's the witch herself, you have to go a couple hundred years later. Back in 1756, there was a guy, Dr. Henry Harrington. He too was referring to this stone thing, whatever it is. And he stated, all it is, back in 1756, he stated, in ancient days, tradition shows a base and wicked elf arose, the Witch of Wookey Hole. So there he was, the very first instance, the very first recorded naming of the witch, and it just stuck ever since. The witch officially doesn't have an official name. Like, it's not like all this lore from hundreds of years of people talking about her, and nobody has able to be produced like an actual name for her. Instead, her name has more to do with the location itself. That's why she's called essentially the Witch of Wookey Hole. Now, how she came to be, very, very fascinating stuff. No one has an official idea of when this happened, because the cave itself, there have been expeditions into it and evidence found that humans have been using this cave for over 45,000 years. I mean, just to give you some perspective, this is a cave that has been visited for a long, long time, and who knows, it'll probably be visited 45,000 years into the future too. So any evidence that people have found, it goes to show what's probably one of the earliest known human civilization locations that we have physical evidence of people utilizing. So somewhere between those 45,000 years, there was apparently a young man who fell in love somewhere near that area near Wookie Hole. And so what had happened was he fell in love, but also in that area there was a witch, a pretty malicious witch. She was someone who was not happy herself, and she especially hated having anything involving young couples or people in love around her village. She apparently lived near the village, and she constantly terrorized the poor people that were there. It was so much to the point that the people were in constant fear of her. I mean, she was to the point where she was striking terror in those people, and she would torment them. She would apparently spoil their food. She would ruin their cattle. She would just basically make a big nuisance of herself, and then strike fear and terror within those around her. But it's very unlucky for those that happen to be in love, especially because this witch was not having it. And so what had happened was, one day, one young man, he was in love too. This witch heard about it, and she did something to him. She said some kind of curse of some sort, or she did something involving with the woman that he loved. But for whatever reason, this young man then was so destroyed, like his love was so destroyed, his love was in tatters, that he swore that he would never, ever, ever love again. And so doing this, he took like a vow of celibacy and a vow of desolation, and he just wanted to basically become a monk at that point. And so the rest of his life, he dedicated it specifically to his religion and to his church. Now, the witch thought she might get away with doing something like this. She was probably very happy that yet again she tormented some young lover and destroyed the relationship that he had. But lo and behold, cut to a couple of years later, this monk would eventually become a pretty powerful member of the church, and he never forgot about what this witch had done to him. It was so much so to the point that the villagers, seeing what kind of power and influence that this monk would eventually have, they went up to him and they asked him and they begged him. They said, please do something about this witch. She's been tormenting us for so long that we just don't know what to do, but you can do something. Please help us. And so this guy, he decided, you know what? Today's the day. I'm going to go ahead and take care of this witch. Now, some people have said that this monk's name was Father Bernard, while others, I was reading other information, there seems to be no name tied to this monk. So what kind of name he has, I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and keep him nameless for now. Just refer him to the monk. But what had happened was, when he decided that that was it, he was going to take care of this witch once and for all, he went ahead and he went straight to that cave, because it was apparently that cave had now become like the home base of the witch herself. This was her location. This is where she hid. Let's say after or at night or wherever she hid, this was her location. So he went straight to it, and the tales go that right before he went in, he kind of like stood outside and dared her to come out, or he stood outside to wait until she returned to the cave. Eventually she did. Either she came out or he went straight to her. But the battle's begun. No clear details as to how what occurred between the two of them or what kind of fight it was, but apparently it was something that this is kind of stuff like almost Lord of the Rings. There was incantations involved. There was magic that was happening as far as the witch. The father, or the monk in this case, was reciting his own passages, just basically countering whatever the witch was throwing at him. He was in turn countering it and using his faith and his religion and his God at that point to fight whatever the witch was doing. And then finally it got to the point where the witch, her location within the cave, because by now the battle took inside the cave itself, her location put her beside some kind of water of some sort, and this monk used it to his advantage. He did some kind of incantation himself or some passage of some sort, and he was able to essentially purify the water or turn it into some kind of holy water. And then I don't know how he did it, but the tales go that he was able to splash her with much water or force the water to rise and go above her. But in any case, once that happened, then the witch was pretty much turned to stone right in or right on that spot itself. And that's where this again, I'll bring up the photo again, that has to do with that specific spot. That's where people say that she turned to stone and remains to this very day. And that's where the visitors, in particular those that try to go to the cave to see the witch, all of them to this day point to that very, very same stone as the one hiding or holding the witch to this day. Quite fascinating stuff. The idea, again, that if this is all true, that when you go to that cave, that's where you're looking at. You're looking at the remains, the calcified remains of a witch herself. And of course, nobody's really touched the stone itself. Nobody has opened it. Nobody has done anything other than but for the fact that it just stays there as is with this legend that we have now. That doesn't end there, because there was a guy by the name of Hebert Balch, and he was an archaeologist. And what he did is sometime in the early 1900s all the way to like the mid 1900s, apparently he did this from 1904 to 1954. He was a huge fan of the cave, and not only that, but he was a huge fan of the lore tied to the witch, that he truly believed that the witch actually existed. So it was his, I guess, lifelong mission to try to make sure that he could find very specific evidence of the witch, because if she lived there for that long, then there was bound to be some evidence tied to her. And sure enough, back in 1912, on a very specific expedition, he found what looked to have been the remains of some very interesting stuff. What you're looking at here are the remains of some bones that are tied to a woman. Now, if this, let's say, is actually the skeleton of the witch herself, we don't know, but they are definitely the remains of a woman, and it's been, I guess, dated or carbon dated to being over 1,000 years old. And he claims, once this guy Hebert Balch found it, he said, "This is it. This is the proof right here." Because on top of finding those bones, he also found the remains of 2 goats, i.e., like the skeletons of 2 goats. He also found a milking pot, and then he also found a knife, which the way it was shaped and the way it looked, he could none other than describe it as being sacrificial in nature. In other words, a knife used in sacrifices altogether. And then some kind of round stalagmite ball that was probably used in the sacrificial natures as well. Not only that, but he also found some other interesting stuff. Here's this picture. This base, or this particular set of stone, has been described as being the location of the witch's pet. Apparently, the lore also extends to the fact that this witch had a dog. And the evidence that ties to this is the way that it looks. It looks like this was a location, if you believe this, it was made so that this is like either the resting place or the eating place of the witch's companion, which was a dog. Most of us associate like a cat with witches, but in this case apparently it was a dog. And the reason for this was because surrounding that particular little stone were a whole bunch of bones around it. And so it was suggested, and it kind of makes some sense, that this was like the feeding place of her pet, of her dog, and she would give him scraps of whatever, either animals she found, or worse, humans in some cases, And then that way, this dog, who was her companion, would eat around that location. So all of this was found by that archaeologist, and it all paints a pretty fascinating picture. It's cool, isn't it? I mean, to think that all this could be true. I don't know if it is, could not be true. Who knows? But if it is true, I mean, this is all very, very fascinating evidence. Some of the most clear evidence yet that something like this, something that again we would only see in movies, actually existed in real life. So to this day, this cave and the urban legend of the Witch of Wookey Cave Holes still is pretty popular. People go to this day. In fact, there's an attraction of some sort. There's apparently a woman or an actress, or I don't know. Wouldn't necessarily call it an actress, but there's someone that gets hired and becomes, I guess, like the witch herself, or plays the witch herself, and she would do this for several years, and then someone else is selected, and then that pattern continues. And this one is someone that goes and then presents information about the lore of the witch, all again pretending to be the witch at the same time. So that's how popular this urban legend still is there to this day. So what do you guys think? Have y'all heard of this urban legend before? The Witch of Wookey Hole. There again associated with the caves, or the Wookey Hole caves there in the United Kingdom. If anyone has been there and has more information, it'd be great to hear. I haven't even touched some of the other stuff that people hear within the caves. Apparently, people hear voices within the cave. They see strange things. It's not only been that, but there have been paranormal manifestations that have occurred in the cave. This is a cave that's been visited by several ghost hunting crews apparently also. That's yet a whole nother aspect to talk about, maybe in another video, but at least with this regards, if anyone has more information about the witch herself, that would be great to hear too. So alright everybody, thanks again as always, take care.